Hey guys, Mathel here once again, and today I want to show you the basically completed character at this point of a Wander with a slight twist in that I use two ranged attack totems to help me out with the clear and the single target, purely firing off with Barrage, some Volley fires, and it's basically just a slight twist to the usual Wanders you would see with Kinetic Blast and Barrage. Instead, we are full clearing with Barrage, we're using two additional totems, as well as that we're actually attacking ourselves. So it's pretty much a usual Wander playstyle, but you can also have the assistance of a couple of totems, and you can see me here showcasing it in a tier 14 Dark Forest, which has a fair amount of monsters. Basically, you're running around dropping totems every now and again whenever you feel the need to, and attacking with Barrage whenever you like as well. So quite often the playstyle will entail me dropping at least one or two totems around a pack, and it's also pretty handy for fighting abyssal monsters. So overall, it is basically very similar to the usual Wander, except instead of using Kinetic Blast, we're using Barrage for clear, and that is definitely something a bit worse at times, because Kinetic Blast is pretty fucking hard to beat for AoE clear, and Barrage, Volley Fire, it can only really compete these days thanks to the vast amount of basically overgearing and overpowered shit we have in the form of Abyssal Jewels, Piscators, and all of that. So the character is a Scion. I am grabbing the Deadeye Ascendancy, and as well as that, the Hierophant Ascendancy, which lets you summon a second totem if it's in your helm. So we have a 4-link ranged attack totem with Barrage in our helm, which also has a built-in Hypothermia, thus giving us a 5-link, so I can use two totems and then attack by myself with Barrage as well, thus giving us 3 sources of Barrage and basically giving us an absolute bullet hell effect. So overall, it has cleared fairly well, and the single target is, I'd say, more impressive than my usual Wanders with a similar sort of budget, because this character currently does not use anything too outlandish. No Dying Suns, no 6-link, no Barrage Helm Enchant, so it's just some pretty standard gear, Piscators, a few jewelry, and some Abyssal Jewels. It's still fairly budget at its core, I would say, but the single target definitely has a higher ceiling, and as well as that, somewhat of a lower floor, because if your totems die, your single target does go down pretty drastically, which does happen fairly often against the end game fights, because a lot of things kill your totems pretty damn quickly. However, if they can survive, if you position them well enough, if you re-summon them at the right opportune moments, then I think you are vastly rewarded for it, and the single target should be better. At my current stage, we're looking at something like 700,000 Shaper DPS on my Barrage, and about 200,000 to 300,000 on each totem. In Harbinger, when I made a similar sort of character, I only managed to pull something like 400,000 damage on Barrage by myself with similar sorts of gear and no secondary totems. So overall, this has cleaned up the end game a lot more comfortably, and I'm fairly confident that it's worth doing. It's just a different playstyle altogether to what you'd be used to, and probably not fast enough for some of the people that only have been really doing Kinetic Blast in the past, because it really doesn't hold a candle to Kinetic Blast for clear speed. As well as that, you do occasionally have to drop a totem. Now, usually I would have a separate video just giving you a sort of basic description of the build like I'm doing right now, and then a separate video for endgame fights and all of that. But at this stage, I was a bit behind on what I could achieve with videos and the character in the past few days, thanks to some athletics and some hot weather and all of that. So I basically will just be giving you this here right now, and then a quick overview of what the character is like, and then showing you all of the Guardian fights and all of the Shaper and Elder fights as well. So this here is the character. It's a currently level 91 Scion called Fix Immolate Helm, and that is specifically because the Immolate like this built-in Hypothermia on helms, so there's a built-in Immolate on the Elder side of things. That currently doesn't work because it instead gives you increased burning damage and not the actual immolate support. So unfortunately, I wanted to build this character around that support, the immolate one. Can't do that, so instead I am basing the character around the hypothermia support in the helm, which is still a good 30 to 40% more damage when things are chilled. So it is still a very good 5-link for the build. So that's what we're basing the character around, paired with the Scion Hierophant. Skills in your helm can have up to 1 additional totem summoned at a time, and a few other things, and then paired with the Deadeye, which gives you an additional projectile. So instead of 4 for your barrage, you have 5, which is a very large gain. You also get proj speed and some pierce for your targets as well. So all in all, we are shooting quite a lot with our 3 volley fires. So running 1, 2, and 3, giving us 6 additional projectiles, which do not add to the single target, mind you. They simply give you extra spray out to the sides of your barrage rather than adding to the single target at all. So it's making your barrage a clear skill, and then you run 2 totems, so then when you have all of that, it becomes quite a nice little clusterfuck. Now, the purpose and benefit behind that is, as you can see, our current barrage is 800k pure single target. That is against Shaper with our, what I will show you is pretty modest gear. And then when you have your secondary totems running 400k a piece, all of a sudden we're at a good 1.6 mil against Shaper, or that type of target. If your totems can survive at their maximum, you're dealing quite a large amount of damage. And as I said, compared to my last character, who probably only had about 3 to 400,000 single target with the same sort of gear, it makes the endgame fights a lot more realistic. And as well as that, you can drop your totems and run around a lot more and not have to be in the fight as much. So it's a bit of a different playstyle and something to get used to. Now, to cover the gear real quick, we do have our hypothermia helm. I just plain bought one of these that had good life and hypothermia. And in that, we have ranged attack totem, LE damage with attacks, barrage, and cold damage. So I am very largely based around cold damage because that's just what I thought would work really well with hypothermia, and scaling with some frost bomb and some penetration down here. So largely cold damage based, as you can see here, and a little bit of lightning coming from things like Wrath, as well as, you know, Jules jewelry. That's fine as well. And then in my main barrage setup, I also have hypothermia, slow approach, barrage, LE damage with attacks, and added cold. So we are very largely cold damage based, and my penetration comes from Frost Bomb, so you're placing that underneath your single targets and strategically placing totems whenever you can. Now, aside from that, I am of course running a Piscators at the moment, which is a pretty obvious sort of no-brainer for this league, given our Abyssal Jewel status that can give us a flat LE, flat cold, that sort of stuff, meaning the Piscators is going to be stronger than ever this league. But if you're not really abusing too many jewels like I am, so I'm only using 1, 2, 3, kind of a 4th over here, and then these here to replace our volley fires. So we're looking at something like 7 jewels. With 7 jewels, it's pretty debatable. You can very easily make a better wand than a Piscators. Well, I shouldn't say very easily, but it is realistic to buy one or make one with crit, attack speed, damage, that sort of stuff, maybe even some of the new Shaper mods. But this is just a very easy set it and forget it sort of wand that you won't ever really have to replace to be able to clear everything in the game. So Piscators right now is definitely very strong. And like I said, comboed with my Abyssal Jewels, I have cold damage to attacks and cold damage to wand attacks, pretty much on every jewel with a little bit of life as well. And in my Tomb Fist, I have just one over here, which is a searching eye, and one with a murderous eye, just so you can intimidate as well. Bit of cold damage. And then each of these have cold damage, double cold damage, and maybe some life if I could get it, to replace for pure boss fights when we go in against the boss fights, like the Guardians and the Elder stuff. I do replace all 3 of these. And it's not too big a deal. It's not a huge nuisance before the fights to do this, because you don't have any momentum, so you can just stop, build up your power charges with your totems by pressing them thanks to this, and then run in and do some damage. So sometimes I keep 1 volley fire, sometimes I keep all 3 volley fires, depending on the boss, but when you want the real single target, you sub out your volley fires and get a lot more damage thanks to the jewels. Now, aside from that, the gearing option is basically just as usual with a Wanda, maybe some flat elemental damage. So I've got a bit of cold here, a bit of cold there. Some accuracy goes a long way, and some crit multi, some elemental damage with attacks, life, resists across the board. I will of course link you the path of building and the gear, and you can go over it there yourselves, but it's nothing else too revolutionary or mind-blowing. Running Wrath and Herald of Ice over here, have a separate Frenzy single target over here for cursing stuff and building up frenzies. So that's on my E. I just shoot out 3 frenzies to build up 3 frenzy charges, or simply to curse an enemy or a boss, and that's pretty convenient and rather quick with frenzy, faster attacks, curse on hit, and Ellie weakness. It has been a good setup for the build, and I think it's worth running. And then of course an increased duration, a Frostbomb, and a Vile Haste over here, and Flame Dash and Wrath over here, running an Ice Golem as well. And then of course have a Wise Oak that caps both Lightning and Cold, which are the 2 main damage sources that I deal, but most importantly just make sure you have Cold as your highest resist, because that's where most of our damage will come from this sort of build. And otherwise, I guess I could just talk a bit about the passive tree. Now, Wanding is a complicated passive tree because you have to get all the way up here, meaning you have to sacrifice a lot of stuff that you want. So you have to really pick your battles into what you can and cannot take. You got to try and fill out some life while getting some multi, some crit, and ultimately the elemental damage things. And for quality of life, you do grab Point Blank, which is a huge amount of damage when you're up close and when your totems can be dropped. And then for the leech as well. I played without leech and without this cluster over here up until about level 88. And after getting it at about that level, it does feel a lot smoother to be able to tank a bit and regen life a lot more comfortably. So that's the passive tree, and I should also mention you can do this completely as bows. So if you want to try this sort of build but rearrange it as bows, it will be built a bit easier because you don't have to go all the way up here, and instead you would just grab some bow nodes and all of that shit, and plenty of different bow stuff you could do. Certainly something you guys could explore if you like the idea of double totems and then a whole bunch of bow projectiles going everywhere. And so with that build basically gone over in some level of detail, I can show you the boss fights. These are red tier elders, then the tier 16 guardians, shaper, and a bit of Uber-Tsiri as well. A lot of these I did do quite deathlessly for the most part. You just have to know what the guys do. Place your totems, make sure that the totems survive at times because they do die to quite a lot of things. So you have to try and place them strategically, and as well as that, replace them when you know they're about to die. But you do quite a lot of damage yourself as well. So whenever push comes to shove, you can definitely stand next to the boss and do quite a bit of damage on demand as well, which I definitely try and do. But you do get sort of used to a just totem-based playstyle where you're not doing quite as much damage as you'd usually like to by yourself because you're really trying to focus on getting those totems up. And that's kind of a mistake at times, and you'll see that in the Hydra fight because a lot of the time it is better just to try and get some of your own damage in if the boss just does not want to let you have any totems. But when you do get that shit going, you can see that a red tier elder melts pretty goddamn quickly, and it's maybe the highest DPS I've had at its potential, though the problem is you'll rarely be at that potential, and most fights won't let you get to that potential of DPS. There's only some that will, like potentially Elder, maybe some Shaper, that sort of stuff. Just the targets that really do let you go completely ham against them. Uber-Tsiri is probably another good example as well. And as well as that, sometimes Minotaur. You can see that we play around with Minotaur just a bit here, get the totems going, press our flasks and go completely ham, and then reset and try again when we're ready to do so. But this level of damage for a Wander with absolutely no Dying Sun, Sick Link, Barrage Projectile Helm, all of that is, I'd say, pretty impressive because that is usually the kind of stuff that makes Barrage completely absurd, and it's all that additional scaling that most other skills just don't get. So you can, of course, take it to its logical conclusion, and as well as that with bows, just get all kinds of additional projectiles and arrows and all that, and it will be a big old steamroll. But for now, this is just fine and works out well enough when you have the gear and the character perfectly balanced, because a lot goes into making it do as much damage as it currently does. So that is to say that you do need decent enough jewelry, all the elemental damage to attacks, the crit multi, high enough levels to get all of the good passives, filling out your accuracy, your flat damage, the right jewels with, dual purpose damage at least, I would think, as a base requirement, and as well as that, quality in all your gems. When it all comes together, it becomes pretty goddamn glorious, but before that, it may be somewhat lackluster, so be careful not to, be too upset about your damage before you've truly built the character all the way through. Now, Chimera over here was a slight problem. The damage, pretty damn absurd, and killing the ads with the extra totems was really helpful, so that was actually pretty easy and comfortable. But Chimera himself kills the totems pretty quickly, and as well as that, the smoke phase is just super annoying for this character because you just have to kind of run around and pop the smoke phases, and you'll see that I almost die in this clip to the smoke phase, and that's because he's also got 50% accuracy on the map, and he just hits me every single time he does his little teleport. But besides that, you can definitely see that the playstyle here is pretty comfortable for this sort of stuff. Drop your totems, they help you out, they take a few hits, and they also do a lot of additional damage. So here I got kind of unlucky on finding the right smoke phase and almost died because he hit me with every attack given the 50% attack speed. So the real just absolute flaw in a Wanda's arsenal of defense is shown here, and that is you don't have Fortify, you don't have Shield Charge, Whirling Blades, and you just gotta run. And my character doesn't have an immense amount of movement speed, but he's got enough for my own purposes. And then comes the biggest problem for this sort of character, and that is the Hydra fight, or things like it. Totems just cannot survive against this shit, and I'm forced to spend about 2 minutes killing this boss, maybe 2 or 3 minutes, so it isn't, drastically slow, but it is a bit slower than every other fight out there, because simply put, totems just keep dying, and as I mentioned, you should pretty much just go ahead and try and kill her yourself for the most part without even worrying about the totems. I tried quite hard to worry about my totems and make sure they're doing a lot, and, eventually it does still die. It's just not particularly worth trying to wait for your totems there. Then we're moving into Shaper, and this is an example of a fight where the totems really do help quite a bit. You can, sit back and let them do all the work if you really want, but they also take some extra damage and do some extra damage from a distance. Now, Shaper himself is kind of annoying because you really have to place things correctly, and totems die immensely easily to anything. Now, a lot of the time you will be able to get them down and they won't be dying because you won't have messed up the way I do and spawn him on top of balls and all that sort of stuff. When you can do that, the damage is truly glorious. When you can't, it's a little bit lackluster, but the previous Wonder I did on somewhat of a budget really struggled with Shaper, and I wouldn't have expected anyone to replicate it, whereas this one seemed a lot easier and a lot more doable. I only died once, I think, or maybe twice at the third phase, which I won't be showing you because it's kind of long and boring trying to avoid this stuff. This is just second phase where we avoid some things, and I show you the DPS, which is more than adequate. So it definitely can serve as a decent sort of template for a Wanda to have these barrage projectiles and range attack totems. And finally, you'll see that in the Uburutsiri fight. When you get the totems down and set yourself up for success, you can definitely get Utsiri down very easily, much easier than the previous one I did could. Now, it may take a bit of practice to get this sort of boss fight down and understand everything that's happening, and as well as that, you could see I took out my Ellie weakness there when I'm doing my Frenzy, because I can't afford to curse myself with Ellie weakness on hit here. So it's just pure Frenzy on my E and no Ellie weakness curse. But it is a bit tricky to get this fight down for your first time, especially on a character like this. It's very doable, but it's not the easiest fight in the world, and you do have to know what you're doing against this level of fight to still be able to get it through on this sort of a budget. Once you have a 6th link, maybe once you have a Dying Sun, then it becomes a lot easier, but that's not the type of stuff I expect a lot of people to have. So this is the last clip. This is probably the last you'll see of the build. I will post it in the build guide section so you can check out the path of building and the gear and all of that. Hope you enjoyed the build, guys. I thought ranged attack totems were pretty worth doing in this Scion format, and I'll see you next time.